The white doors of the cellar stood open, as if expecting us. 4 old stoneware crocks sat on the steps going down. They looked like they were filled with nothing except rainwater and cobwebs. But as we stepped past them, a brown field mouse suddenly darted out from the shadows, and we nearly jumped out of our skin. Telling me to wait until he had a good look around, Harrison ducked his head and crept into the cellar first. Then his hand poked out of the darkness and waved for me to follow. It took my eyes a while to see into the shadows. The cellar was low, squarish room. Half-cut tree logs, with bark still on them, ran close over our heads, and the floor was hard-packed clay, same as Master Hackler's. Beside me, Harrison whispered, "You see anything?" "I can't see a thing down here. It's all in this mess. How about you? You see something for us?" About 101 things were all scattered and stuffed into that cellar. It would have put Lily into a fit, the way things were left all which way. Carpenter tools, a half-made chest, and 2 small red-painted cupboards lay on the floor of the steps, as if the fella making them had just set them there and turned and run off. Deeper in the shadows, I could see a big wooden barrel, half-moon-shaped buggy wheels, stacks of potatoes and turnips, and a pile of broken chairs and a heap of other things against the walls. "Go on over there," Harrison whispered, pointing to the far-off cellar. "Just poke around a little." At the other end of the room, my eyes caught sight of something. Hidden behind a wall of barrels stacked almost to the ceiling beams was a ragged, torn corner of blue and white. Coming around, I saw an old straw pallet and a pile of coverlets sitting there, plain as day, with a crock of buttermilk and a brown jug of cider and a basket stuffed full of food inside. "Harrison!" I called out. "Look here!" "What?" Harrison said, stumbling and climbing through the dark cellar. "What?" When he got to where I was standing, he looked around the row of barrels and squeezed his eyes shut and raised his hands up to the ceiling. "Glory be, glory be, glory be," he whispered, shaking his hands in the air. "That man was telling the truth all along. Sure enough he was." After that, me and Harrison pounced on the food faster than 2 half-starved cats on a black bird. We hadn't eaten at all since we had been in the cornfield that day before, so we snapped up the pieces of bread, sopped in buttermilk, the jelly cup, the slice of cold bacon at the bottom of the basket, and the caved-in baked apple. I was so awful thirsty I gulped down more than half of that jug of cider, and Harrison had to tug it out of my hands to get some for himself. "You have spoiled to stink, Samuel," he grinned, shaking his head. "Give me some of that cider now." But after we had eaten everything that had been left for us in that hiding place, down to the dried-up crumbs in the bottom of the basket, I was still hungry as a horse, and I got the idea of poking around the cellar for more food or cider. Only Harrison wouldn't hear of it. "That ain't the right thing to do, stealing," Harrison said, leaning back against the cellar wall and pulling a blanket up to his chin. "You ate plenty enough. Don't want to hear no more, Samuel." "But you stole from Master Hackler," I said, my voice raising. "You took boots and the gloves and the fancy bonnet from Miss Catherine." "You hush," Harrison said, glaring at me. "They weren't stealing." He looked up at the wood planks over our heads. "Now you be quiet. Folks is living up there, you hear?" "Why is me stealing food wrong? And what you done ain't?" Harrison pressed his lips together in an angry line. "'Cause stealing is taking things that don't belong to you, and I didn't take nothing that didn't belong to me." He held his hands out, palms up. "Look at these old hands of mine." His stiff fingers trembled. "Who owns these hands?" "You does." "Samuel," he squinted hard at me. "You got anything sitting on them shoulders that thinks or not?" He smacked his left hand. "Who owns this hand? Who bought this hand?" "Master Hackler," I tried. "And who owns this leg?" "Master Hackler." He kept going on, pointing to his arms, his legs, his back, his feet, and then my feet and my arms and legs, making me say Master Hackler's name each time, until I wished I hadn't even breathed the word in the first place. And then Harrison said, "Now, if my hands don't belong to me, and they take something that don't belong to me neither, is that stealing?" "I suppose not," I said uneasily, because Harrison wasn't making one bit of sense. "All right, then." Harrison leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. "That's why what I done wasn't wrong." I thought for a while. Then I asked in a real low, quiet voice, "So you saying it ain't wrong if I take more to eat and drink from the cellar, 'cause my hands don't belong to me?" Harrison's eyes flashed open and snapped. "Was you listening at all, Samuel? This cellar don't belong to us, and our hands don't belong to Master Hackler no more. So if we take something from this cellar, that would be stealing." He unfolded one of the blankets and tucked it around him. "Lordy, you was thick as a turnip sometimes." I was getting more and more angry. Harrison was talking nonsense about what was stealing and what wasn't, what belonged to us and what didn't. And I was hungry. Hungrier than all my times Master Hackler and Miss Catherine had taken away my supper meals. And a whole cellar full of food was sitting around us. My eyes fell on that roll of gray yarn sitting beside the empty basket. "This yarn belongs to me," I said, holding up the yarn and waving it in front of Harrison. "You said it did, for." "Yes." Harrison looked down at his hands. "Then I'm going to give away my yarn for taking some more food. So I leave the yarn right here." I stood and set it carefully on top of one of the barrels, so whoever comes down here in this cellar can find it, and then taking more food for my own self ain't wrong. Harrison sighed. "You can't give away that gray yarn, Samuel." "I'm hungry." I stared at Harrison. My breath went out and in angry puffs. "I don't want no worthless piece of yarn." "It ain't worthless," Harrison said softly. "Looks worthless to me." I picked up the yarn and pulled out the tangles. "Well, you doesn't know everything, now does you?" Harrison answered sharply. He laid down, smacked a place for his head in the straw tick, and turned his face to the wall. "Yes, I does." Harrison was silent. "Yes, I does," I said louder. "Then you sure must know where that gray yarn came from." Harrison's voice was muffled by the blankets. "Where?" My voice was sharp and angry. "Where'd it come from?" Harrison's head turned to look at me. "Your own mama," he snapped. I stared at Harrison. It seemed like the threads grew warm in my hands after that, almost as if my mama herself had just given me that yarn. Used to be, I would ask Lily if my mama had used the rolling pin or that flat iron, just to set my hands on something that she touched, since there was nothing left for me to remember. But in all that time they had raised me, Lily and Harrison had never said one word about having gray yarn that once belonged to my mama. They had never told me anything that she left behind when she was sold off. "Stop thinking up a hundred questions to be asking right now," Harrison said sharply. "I ain't talking no more about it." He smacked the straw tick with his hand. "Now, you lay down here and you get some sleep, or I'm going to hand you over to them dogs my own self. I'm powerful tired of you." Heaving a loud sigh, I lay down on the smallest edge of the straw tick, as far away as I could from old Harrison. I put the yarn in front of me where I could see it. Maybe I figured that looking at it would remind me of something about my mama. Squinting my eyes, I tried to see her hands spinning that wool. Did she have thin, skinny, bony fingers like mine? Was she going to use the yarn to make something? Maybe something for me. Then a terrible thought went through my mind. Did they take her right in the middle of her work? Was she spinning the same yarn Harrison had given to me? My mouth turned dry as dust, thinking about it. "Harrison?" I turned my head and whispered real quiet. "Harrison, you there?" But Harrison's breathing was slow and even, like he was in a deep sleep. If I woke him, I knew he'd be in a fit worse than one of Miss Catherine's, so I set my head back down, closed my eyes, and tried to think of something else besides my mama spinning that yarn. And I must have fallen asleep after that, because the next thing I knew, Harrison was shaking me awake, and the quick-footed steps were coming down the steps across the cellar floor. Chapter 16, Widow Taylor. The footsteps stopped on the other side of the wall of barrels, and a white woman's voice spoke up fast and breathless. "I'm Miss Lucy Taylor," the voice said, "and I have my husband's rifle with me, and I know how to use it because he taught me, and I'm not afraid to shoot anything, even colored people, so—" The voice slowed and paused, as if thinking what to say. "So—" There was a long silence. "So you best not cause me any trouble," the voice finished quickly. Beside me, Harrison sat up fast. His hands plucked at his coat and the blankets and the basket, looking for something. "We got money to pay you, Miss Taylor," he called out. "That fellow in the boat, he give us money to pay you. Lord have mercy, don't shoot us. Me and Samuel, well, we'll go and give you all the money we got." Shaking the leather pouch, Harrison poured the coins into his trembling hands. One rolled silently into the blankets. "Go on, get that coin, Samuel," he whispered. "How many collards are behind that barrel?" "I can hear 2. Are there more?" "That's all. Just an old man and a boy," Harrison said. "Well, come out behind those barrels so I can see you." My heart hammered in my ears as me and Harrison moved out from where we was hiding like 2 caught mice. On the other side stood the woman who called herself Lucy Taylor. She was smaller than her voice sounded and dressed head to toe in black. A black bonnet, black dress, black shoes. An old hunting rifle rested against the silk folds of her dress, and her face was shadowed in the deep black bonnet. The widow lady, I thought. That's who this is. But glancing quick at her hands, I noticed a strange thing. The white hands wrapped around the rifle weren't wrinkly and thin-skinned of an old widow lady. They were smooth and young. "You don't need to come any closer," the woman said. "Just stand there." Me and Harrison stopped in our footsteps, not saying a word. "Did you come a long way?" the woman asked, after an uncomfortable silence. She stared at us, holding the gun metal tight. "Oh, a ways," Harrison answered, keeping his eyes down. "Yes'm." "Is the boy someone's slave too?" Harrison's hand tightened on my arm. "Yes'm." I could hear the woman's dress rustling as she stepped closer and peered at me from her black bonnet. She had a round, pale face, and the way it looked inside her bonnet made me think of a spring bulb set inside the earth. "My family in Kentucky kept slaves. A colored woman looked after me growing up. Her name was Letty." She turned to Harrison. "Did you ever know a colored woman named Letty?" "No, ma'am." Harrison cleared his throat. "But we got money to pay you if you just let us go on now. We ain't gonna cause you no trouble." He held out his handful of silver coins. "Just let me and Samuel move on to the next place." The woman was silent, not even looking at the coins. And then she said real quiet and sudden, "My husband, Jacob, is dead." Harrison looked down. "Purely sorry to hear that." "He came down with a fever in August, and after a spell of hot weather we had," the woman said in a tight-strung voice, "the doctor in town tried all his fancy remedies. Jacob is as strong as a horse, he told me. But I came into Jacob's bed chamber one morning, and he opened his eyes and told me that he was going away. By that evening, he was dead." "Purely sorry to hear that," Harrison said again. There was more silence, and then the woman said softly, "I've seen him, though." Eyes wide, she looked at Harrison. "Do colored people believe in seeing those who are gone?" A shiver went through me, but Harrison cleared his throat and said slowly, "Well, now, I suppose yes. I suppose they does." The widow Taylor ducked her bonnet down. "I see Jacob in the kitchen sometimes," she said quietly. "He sits at the table looking the same as he did in life, and he tells me how to do things when I'm close to tears. How to figure out the farm accounts, how to pull corn for the fodder, and how to prime the pump for the well. He says. The woman's voice trembled and stopped, and she reached for something behind her. Well, now it's almost evening here. I brought you some supper, she said in a hurry. You've been sleeping in the cellar all day without any food to eat. She set a basket of food on the floor in front of her. I put in a ham bone left from yesterday's stew and 6 corn cakes and a handful of snap beans, she said, tapping the basket with her foot. Tomorrow evening, what I would do is drive Jacob's wagon around the cellar door and take you to Reverend Price Church when I go for my ladies' prayer meeting. Reverend Price Church is where Jacob always took the coloreds next. She stared at me and Harrison with a scared kind of look in her eyes again. You won't give me no difficulties this evening or tomorrow, will you? You won't take any of Jacob's things from the cellar and run off, will you? Harrison held out the coins again. Me and Samuel's got plenty of money here to pay you for that food, Miss Taylor. Well, yes, her voice trembled. I suppose. I watched as the widow lady opened a black-edged handkerchief and set it carefully on the clay floor between us. Put 5 of your coins in there, she said, keeping her eyes on us. Harrison reached down and dropped 5 silver coins into the middle of the handkerchief. You can step away now, the lady said, and after we moved far enough back, she bent over and lifted each lace corner of the handkerchief real careful-like so that her white fingers didn't touch the same coins that our black hands had touched. Miss Catherine was always that way, too. Made me feel like my skin was no different than a fireplace soot. Miss Catherine tucked the handkerchief in her dress and picked up the hunting rifle. I didn't want to keep hiding coloreds in the cellar, she said, turning to leave. But Jacob told me to carry his rifle and keep doing the things just as he would do. You'll tell me if you see him down here, won't you? Then in a swirl of black silk, she ran up them steps, shut the cellar door behind her, leaving me and Harrison in the pitch darkness. Lord have mercy, Harrison said loudly. You still standing next to me, Samuel? He reached down and clapped his hand on my shoulder. Squinting in the shadows, I said, You don't think our dead husband is walking around here, do you? Like she said he was? Lordy, I sure do hope not. Last thing we need to worry about is dead white folks, too. Harrison shuffled forward. Now, where'd she go and leave that good basket of food? Sitting down on the straw tick, we divided up our food she had brought. Harrison left most of the ham bone and 4 corn cakes for me, and took just 2 little corn cakes and a few snap beans for himself. Ain't that hungry, he said, but I figured he was remembering how I had been begging and scraping for some more food that morning. While we were eating those corn cakes, I started thinking about the gray yarn again, and I tried asking about it and thinking maybe Harrison would tell me something more. This gray yarn come from my mama? I said, picking up the tangle of wool. Yes, Harrison nodded his head and chewed slowly and silent. And you already heard all you needs to know, Samuel. But I kept on. Was my mama spinning the yarn when the Master Hacklet took her away? Harrison fixed me with a stare. Is that why you kept it? 'Cause of that? Harrison heaved a loud, angry sigh. Samuel, you try my soul worse than the devil himself. I ain't telling you anything else. You hear? His voice rose. I got good enough reasons for keeping some things secret, and if you keep on asking me foolish things, I swear I will just up and leave you. You hear? He snapped his handful of beans hard. Snap, snap, snap. I put the yarn in my pocket and kept quiet. Don't you feel sorry for that white lady being left alone like that? I asked. I feel sorry for her missing her husband so much. She ain't very old. Well, Harrison said, still sounding mad, I don't. Why? I picked up the ham bone. 'Cause corn and crow don't grow in the same field. What? White folk and black folks ain't got the same feelings. They ain't the same people as us, and I don't know how white folks feel, and I sure don't know one sorry thing, and she sure don't know one sorry thing about me. Corn and crows, they don't grow in the same field. You saying you ain't sad when someone else dies? I thought about Lily going to visit her children in the Negro burying ground and talking to each one of them. Now, Vinny, she would say, don't you go tearing around heaven all the time, like you used to when you was down here with us. If they's white, I got one feeling. If they's black, I got another, Harrison said. I stared at Harrison, my mouth open. You saying you feel happy when white folks die? Harrison smacked my arm. Course not. You want me to go straight to hell right now, Samuel? Lord almighty, what makes you talk like that? He brushed the cornbread crumbs off his shirt. I'm just saying I got enough things of my own to feel sorry about. And a white lady and her dead husband who never met before ain't something I feel sorry about. If I died right here, you think she'd feel pity about my old black skin? You figure she'd raise one finger to help you? I thought about how she picked up the coins in that handkerchief, corner by corner. I don't know, I told Harrison. Maybe. No baby about it, Harrison snorted. You a fool if you think so. But later that night, after Harrison had fallen asleep, I heard the white lady crying to herself, and I'm ashamed to say that I felt downright sorry for her. The sound came from the room above the cellar, maybe a bedchamber, and the terrible sad wailing almost set me crying too. I heard the lady calling out the name Jacob Taylor over and over, talking to no one about the farm and the doctor and the church, and I felt sorry enough to have gone up them steps and fetched a cold rag for her poor lost senses. I thought that this side of the River Jordan would be better than the side we had come from. From what Harrison had told me, I figured that all the black folks over here would be free and all the mean white folks and dogs were left behind. But this side of the river was full of its own kind of trouble, seems like. I pictured the ghost of Jacob Taylor floating all around, and a shiver went through me. Was he keeping an eye on me and Harrison? Was he making sure we didn't run off? Something tumbled over in the cellar. Maybe it was a mouse skittering around, but I couldn't wait for another day to come so we could climb into a wagon and leave the widow Taylor's sad house behind.